When I talk to people about poetry, often the questions I get aren't the ones I expect as a teacher. I expect people to wonder, well, is this poet better than that poet, or why does free verse emerge in the 20th century, or do you think that contemporary poetry is good or not? But often I think that the questions that people are asking me when they hear that I'm a poet, that I teach literature, are really much more basic. Questions like, oh, what poetry should I start reading if I don't really know much about poetry? What should I be spending my time paying attention to in order to just learn how to navigate the reading of a poem? And I think part of this comes from the fact that um, literary education in America, especially as it's conducted, in K through 12 and even college, we we teach good students how to read stories and novels pretty well, I think. For the student who really wants to read, who is willing to read a whole novel, say in junior high or high school, for the student who really puts in the time to make the most out of their English classes, say in college, I think we do an okay job of helping them learn how to read a novel, to read something that's written in paragraph format that gives a coherent narrative. Now, we don't always do that very well, but I think when our educational system works well, people learn how to read novels okay, and can become the type of people who are novel readers, who can pick up Harry Potter or Hunger Games, or Gone Girl, or pick your latest popular novel, and they can read it and get a lot out of it that maybe they wouldn't have been able to if they hadn't have had that literary instruction in high school or college. And yet we don't do that for poetry. I think poetry is something that teachers aren't prepared well to teach. And so we approach poetry as either something that kind of we have to cover in a quick unit before we get to the novels, which we know everyone cares about and likes, or we spend all of our time trying to get students to just love literature. And because novels are pretty accessible, we spend all our time just getting them to see the worth of a novel. And poetry is always left on the side. And so one of the things that I think that this channel can do is be a forum for helping people learn how to figure out what to look for in a poem. What are we even doing when we read a poem? What are the many uses of poetry? And begin to do for people what the best teaching of English does in high schools and colleges now. And hopefully by the time that this channel develops, it can be a place where people can go to become poetically literate. And of course, I want to go into things like non-European poetry, non-Western poetry, you know, uh, poetry by marginalized voices, poetry by people who we don't often think of as having poetic traditions. This is especially true, like I said, of non-Western countries, but also of ancient communities, places, and time periods that we don't often think about at all. Sometimes an entry point can be poetry. So that's what I want to use this for. I also want to talk about, when there are popular poets of today, when there are poetic controversies of the day. I want to get into those too, but I'm most interested in people being helped to understand how to read poetry, understand how to approach poetry in a way that they've already maybe learned how to approach novels, but never got the chance with poetry. So that's kind of what I want to do here. And thanks for joining me.